My name is Clive, and I'm 32 years old. 10 years ago, when I asked my parents for help with college tuition, my father looked me straight in the eyes and said, "You were a mistake. We only wanted one child." Those words shattered my world but ultimately forged my path from abandoned son to CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company. The irony? The brother they cherished ended up fired with one phone call from me, and now my parents are desperate to reconnect. Before I dive into how I went from being the unwanted mistake to the person my family now desperately seeks, let me know where you're watching from, and hit that subscribe button if you've ever had to rebuild your life from scratch. I grew up in what appeared to be a typical middle-class suburban neighborhood in Boston. Our house was a modest two-story colonial, with a neatly trimmed lawn and a basketball hoop in the driveway that nobody ever used. From the outside, we looked like the perfect American family, mother, father, and two sons. But inside those walls, the reality was starkly different. My brother Thomas was 5 years older than me, and from my earliest memories, it was clear he was the golden child. Thomas had the perfect grades, the perfect smile, the perfect future. At least that's what my parents, Richard and Martha, constantly reminded everyone within earshot. The favoritism wasn't subtle. For Thomas's 10th birthday, my parents threw an elaborate party with a hired magician, a custom cake shaped like a baseball field, and 20 of his friends from school and the neighborhood. They rented out the local bowling alley and ordered personalized bowling shirts with Thomas's team embroidered on the back. My father took the entire day off work, something I never witnessed him doing otherwise. When my 10th birthday rolled around, I got a small family dinner and a store-bought cake with my name misspelled. My mother had forgotten to order it in advance and picked it up on her way home from work. "Be grateful we remembered," she said when I pointed out they spelled it Cleve instead of Clive. Christmas mornings told the same story. Thomas's pile of gifts always towered over mine. One particular Christmas stands out in my memory. I was 8 and Thomas was 13. He received a brand new mountain bike, a Nintendo gaming system, and a collection of sports equipment. My presents consisted of a set of colored pencils, 2 pairs of socks, and a science book that I later discovered was borrowed from the school library. "Thomas needs these things for his development," my father explained when he caught me staring at the disparity. "When you're older and show some promise, perhaps you'll get nicer things too." I tried everything to win their approval. When Thomas made the honor roll, I made sure to achieve straight A's. When he won a regional science fair, I spent months perfecting a project that eventually won at the state level. My trophy sat untouched on the kitchen counter for 3 days before mysteriously disappearing into the garage. I found it years later, buried under old paint cans. Family vacations were another arena for blatant favoritism. The summer Thomas turned 16, my parents took him to baseball training camp in Florida for 2 weeks. I stayed with our neighbor, Mrs. Feldman, an elderly woman who needed help with her cats and gardening. When I asked why I couldn't go too, my mother simply said, "This trip is about Thomas's future. We need to focus on him right now." The only person who ever made me feel valued was my grandmother, Eleanor, my mother's mother. She lived about 30 minutes away, and my parents would drop me at her house whenever Thomas had important events they didn't want me to distract from. Those weekends became my sanctuary. Grandma Eleanor always listened to me. She displayed my artwork on her refrigerator and asked about my friends and interests. She taught me to cook simple meals and told me stories about her childhood during the Great Depression. "You have something special inside you, Clive," she would tell me while we baked cookies or worked in her small garden. "Not everyone will see it, but the right people will. And most importantly, you need to see it in yourself." Those words sustained me through many difficult days at home. But when I turned 16, Grandma Eleanor suffered a massive stroke. She passed away 3 weeks later. At her funeral, I stood alone while my parents consoled each other and fawned over Thomas, who had managed to come home from college for the service. With Grandma Eleanor gone, I lost my only ally and source of unconditional love in the family. The isolation grew more profound, but so did my determination. I threw myself into academics and extracurricular activities, not for my parents' approval anymore, but as my ticket to freedom. I joined the debate team, the math club, and volunteered at the local community center teaching computer skills to senior citizens. I stayed late at school to use the library computers since we only had one computer at home, in Thomas's old room, which had been converted to a family office that somehow only my parents used. By my junior year of high school, I had built a small circle of friends who shared my interests in technology and business. We spent weekends working on coding projects and discussing startups we admired. These friends saw value in me that my family never did, and for the first time, I began to envision a future where I could thrive without my parents' validation. Still, deep inside, a part of me held on to the childish hope that one day I would do something so impressive that my parents would finally see me, really see me, and be proud. That misguided hope would soon be completely shattered in a single conversation that would change the trajectory of my life forever. Senior year arrived with a flurry of college applications, SAT prep, and anxious waiting. While my parents never asked about my plans or offered guidance, I had been methodically preparing for this moment since freshman year. My guidance counselor, Mrs. Reynolds, had been instrumental in helping me navigate the complex world of college admissions and financial aid. "Your academic record is exceptional, Clive," she told me during one of our meetings. "With your grades, test scores, and extracurriculars, you have a real shot at some top-tier schools." By December, I had submitted applications to 12 universities, including several Ivy League schools. I worked on my essays for months, revising and refining them until each word felt perfect. Mrs. Reynolds reviewed them all, offering suggestions and encouragement. "These are some of the best personal statements I've read in 20 years of counseling," she said. "You have a compelling story and a clear vision for your future." The acceptance letters started arriving in March. Yale, rejection. Columbia, waitlisted. University of Pennsylvania, rejection. I tried not to let each no diminish my hope. Then, on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, I checked the mail and found a thick envelope from Massachusetts Institute of Technology. With trembling hands, I opened it in the driveway, not wanting to share this moment with anyone at home. "Dear Clive, we are pleased to offer you admission to the MIT class of..." I couldn't read further, as tears blurred my vision. MIT had been my dream since I first discovered my passion for computer science and business innovation. I stood in the rain, letter clutched to my chest, experiencing a moment of pure, untainted joy. That evening, I mentioned the acceptance at dinner, trying to sound casual despite my racing heart. "MIT? That's expensive," my father commented without looking up from his steak. "Thomas went to Boston University on a partial scholarship, and that was still costly." "I got a scholarship too," I said quickly. "It covers about 70% of the tuition, but I'll still need help with the remaining 30% in living expenses." My mother sipped her wine. "We put a lot of money into Thomas's education. He was worth the investment. Look at him now, working at that big corporation." I swallowed hard. "I've already applied for additional scholarships and plan to work part-time, but I'll still need some family contribution for the financial aid package to work." My father placed his fork down with deliberate slowness. His eyes, when they finally met mine, were cold and distant. "Clive," he said, pronouncing my name like it was foreign to him. "You were a mistake. We only wanted one child." The words hung in the air like poison gas. My mother didn't gasp or object. She simply looked down at her plate and continued eating. "We planned for Thomas," my father continued, his voice matter of fact. "We saved for his education. We prepared for his future. You were an accident that stretched our resources and plans. We gave you a home and food, which is more than many unwanted children get." I felt the room spin slightly. My chest tightened as if concrete was hardening around my heart. I don't understand, I managed to whisper. I've always tried to. That's the problem, my father interrupted. You've always been trying too hard to be noticed. Thomas never needed to try. He was naturally gifted. My mother finally spoke. We already went through college expenses with Thomas. His graduation gift alone cost nearly $20,000. She referred to the new car they had purchased for him upon completion of his business degree. I'm not asking for a car, I said, my voice cracking. I just need help with tuition and expenses that the scholarship doesn't cover. We're not in a position to help, my father stated firmly. If MIT wants you so badly, let them figure out how to pay for it. Or go to community college like other kids whose parents can't afford fancy schools. I looked at my mother, searching for any sign of support or compassion. She briefly met my gaze, then looked away. Her silence was as devastating as my father's words. I excused myself from the table, legs numb as I climbed the stairs to my bedroom. I closed the door and sank to the floor, back against the wall, and finally allowed the tears to come. Not just for the college money, but for 18 years of rejection compressed into one brutally honest moment. You were a mistake. The words echoed in my mind as I looked around my sparse bedroom. Unlike Thomas's room, which had been preserved like a shrine with sports trophies and childhood mementos, mine contained little evidence of parental love or pride. I pulled out my phone and texted my friend Jason. Can I crash at your place for a while? His response came immediately. Of course. Everything okay? No, I replied. But it will be. I spent the next hour packing a duffel bag with essential clothes, my laptop, important documents, and the few meaningful possessions I had. I added the MIT acceptance letter and the small photo of me and Grandma Eleanor that I kept hidden in my desk drawer. It was nearly midnight when I shouldered my bag and took one final look at the room I'd lived in for 18 years. It struck me that I felt nothing about leaving it behind. This house had never been a home to me. I crept downstairs, hearing my father's snores from the master bedroom. On the kitchen counter, I left a brief note. Gone to figure out my future. Don't worry about me. The irony of those last words wasn't lost on me. They had never worried about me before. Why would they start now? The night air was cool as I walked down our street for the last time, rain lightly falling again, as if the universe were providing appropriate cinematography for this pivotal scene in my life. I didn't look back at the house. Instead, I looked ahead, toward Jason's neighborhood, toward uncertainty, toward a future that would now be entirely of my own making. Jason's parents were surprisingly understanding when I explained the situation the next morning. His mother, a social worker, was particularly sympathetic. You can stay as long as you need to get on your feet, she told me over breakfast. But we should talk about your long-term plans. I had already spent most of the night thinking about exactly that. I need to find work right away, I said. I can't go to MIT this fall without financial support, but maybe I can save enough to start at community college. Within a week, I had secured 3 jobs: morning shifts at a local cafe, evening work as a security guard at a warehouse, and weekend hours tutoring high school students in math and science. My days started at 5 in the morning and often didn't end until after midnight. Every dollar I earned went into a savings account dedicated to my education fund. After 2 months with Jason's family, I found a tiny apartment with 3 other roommates, all older students at various stages of their education. The place was cramped and noisy, with peeling paint and unreliable plumbing, but it was affordable and close to my jobs. I enrolled in Boston Community College that fall, taking classes that would transfer to a 4-year university later. Between work and school, I averaged about 4 hours of sleep each night. My roommates rarely saw me except when I was rushing in to shower and change clothes between shifts. Man, you're going to burn out. My roommate Derek warned me one rare evening when I was actually home studying. Nobody can keep up this pace forever. I don't need to keep it up forever, I replied without looking up from my textbook, just long enough to get where I'm going. Despite the exhausting schedule, I maintained a perfect 4.0 GPA. My community college professors noticed my dedication and began offering additional opportunities, research assistantships, academic competitions, connections to industry professionals. I accepted every offer that didn't interfere with my work schedule. After 2 years at community college, I had saved enough to transfer to Massachusetts State University. It wasn't MIT, but it had a respectable computer science program and offered me a merit scholarship that covered half my tuition. I continued working multiple jobs, though I was able to drop down to just 2. A better-paying position as a teaching assistant in the computer science department and weekend work developing websites for local businesses. During my first semester at State, I took a business innovation course taught by Professor Jenkins, a former tech entrepreneur who had sold his company for millions before turning to academia. His class was notorious for being challenging, with a project-based approach that demanded creative thinking and practical application. For our final project, we were tasked with identifying a real-world business problem and developing a technological solution. Most students chose straightforward issues like restaurant reservation systems or inventory management for retail stores. I decided to tackle something more complex. During my time as a warehouse security guard, I had observed countless inefficiencies in how products were tracked and moved through the supply chain. Using that experience as inspiration, I developed a prototype software system that integrated real-time tracking, predictive algorithms for demand forecasting, and automated inventory management. When I presented my project, Professor Jenkins was unusually quiet. The other students shifted uncomfortably in the silence that followed my demonstration. "Mr. Anderson," he finally said, using my last name as he did with all students, "would you be willing to stay after class to discuss this further?" That conversation changed the trajectory of my education and career. Professor Jenkins became my mentor, meeting with me weekly to refine my supply chain management concept and introduce me to industry contacts who might be interested. "You've identified a genuine pain point in a massive industry," he told me during one of our sessions. "With some development, this could be more than a class project." I spent countless nights coding in the university's computer lab, often working until the janitors kicked me out at 2 in the morning. I refined the algorithms, improved the user interface, and added features based on feedback from Professor Jenkins's industry colleagues. By my senior year, I had a functioning prototype that several local businesses had agreed to test. The results were promising: a 25% reduction in inventory costs and a 15% improvement in delivery times. Professor Jenkins urged me to consider commercializing the software after graduation. "You have something valuable here, Clive," he said during our last meeting before commencement. "Don't sell yourself short by taking some corporate job. This could be the foundation of your own company." I graduated summa cum laude with a double major in computer science and business administration. My name was called to thunderous applause from my roommates and professors who had witnessed my relentless work ethic. As I crossed the stage to receive my diploma, I scanned the audience out of habit, half expecting to see my parents despite not having invited them. They weren't there, of course, but neither was the pain I would have felt years earlier at their absence. That evening, as my roommates celebrated with their families, I sat alone in our apartment staring at my diploma. 4 years of exhaustion, sacrifice, and determination condensed into a single document. It wasn't the MIT degree I had once dreamed of, but it represented something perhaps more valuable, proof that I could succeed entirely on my own terms. I opened my laptop and navigated to a folder labeled Future, where I kept the business plan I'd been developing alongside my studies. The title page read, Logitech Solutions, Revolutionizing Supply Chain Management. Below it was a quote from my grandmother. "Not everyone will see it, but the right people will." With my diploma in one hand and my future in the other, I made a promise to myself that night. The rejection that had once broken me would now fuel me. The mistake my parents had labeled me would become a success story they couldn't ignore. Not for their validation. I no longer needed that, but for my own satisfaction. The months following graduation were a harsh lesson in entrepreneurial reality. I had converted our small apartment living room into a makeshift office, much to my remaining roommate's annoyance. My desk consisted of a door laid across 2 filing cabinets, and my business cards were printed at the local copy shop using a discount coupon. My first 10 cold calls to potential clients ended in rejection. Some politely declined, while others didn't bother to hide their skepticism about a 22-year-old recent graduate with no established business history. "Kid, supply chain software is serious business," one operations manager told me bluntly. "Companies like SAP and Oracle have been in this game for decades. What makes you think you can compete?" I modified my approach, offering free consultations to analyze inefficiencies in their current systems. This got me in the door with 3 small local businesses, but none converted to paying clients. They took my analysis, thanked me, and implemented the simpler suggestions themselves. My savings were dwindling rapidly. I took on freelance coding projects to keep the lights on, while continuing to refine my software and pitch to potential clients. Many nights, dinner consisted of ramen noodles and determination. My breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A local brewery had suffered a major inventory disaster when their system failed to track a shipment of specialty hops, resulting in a ruined batch of their seasonal ale. The owner, Samuel Griffin, had overheard me pitching my services at a nearby coffee shop where I often worked to save on electricity. "I heard you talking about supply chain software," he said, approaching my table. "Our current system is a nightmare. Would you be interested in looking at it? Can't promise anything, but if you can help us avoid another disaster, it might be worth a conversation." I spent the next week practically living at Griffin Brewery, analyzing their processes, identifying failure points, and customizing my software to address their specific needs. I implemented a small pilot program focusing solely on their ingredient tracking. 3 weeks later, Samuel called with excitement in his voice. "Whatever you did, it's working. We just got through our biggest production week with 0 inventory issues. Can you come in to discuss expanding this to our distribution tracking?" Griffin Brewery became my first real client, paying actual money for a customized version of my software. Samuel also introduced me to other craft brewery owners facing similar challenges. Within 6 months, I had 5 paying clients and needed to hire my first employee, a part-time customer support specialist who could handle basic troubleshooting while I focused on development and sales. I moved out of the shared apartment and rented a small 1-bedroom place closer to the downtown business district. It was still modest, but having my own space felt like a luxury after years of shared living. I converted the bedroom into an office and slept on a futon in the living room. Priorities. My reputation began growing in the local business community. A feature in the regional business journal brought more attention and clients. I expanded from breweries to small manufacturing operations and regional distributors. Each new client provided insights that helped me refine the software further. The turning point came at an industry conference I had scraped together enough money to attend. I couldn't afford a booth, so I wandered the exhibition hall with a tablet demo of my software, approaching anyone who would give me 5 minutes of their time. During a networking lunch, I found myself seated next to Riley Sanchez, a former logistics director for a major retailer who was now an independent consultant. He gave my usual pitch, expecting polite interest at best. Instead, Riley peppered me with technical questions that demonstrated a deep understanding of the problems my software was designed to solve. By dessert, we had moved to a quiet corner with my tablet between us, diving into the algorithms and user interface. "This is genuinely innovative," Riley said after an hour of exploration. "You're approaching these problems differently than the established players. It's less comprehensive but more intuitive and adaptable." Riley proposed a partnership. Their industry expertise and connections combined with my technical innovation. We spent the rest of the conference huddled together, outlining a business plan and go-to-market strategy. 2 weeks later, Logitech Solutions officially became a partnership with proper incorporation papers and a small investment from Riley to fund our expansion. With Riley's guidance, we approached small and medium-sized businesses that were underserved by the dominant players in the industry. Our pitch was simple: enterprise, level functionality with small business usability and pricing. Securing our first business loan was still a challenge. 5 banks rejected us before a smaller community bank took a chance based on our growing client list and revenue projections. The loan allowed us to hire 3 more employees and move to a proper office space, a converted warehouse with exposed brick walls and industrial lighting that we furnished largely with second-hand equipment. Our team expanded to include developers, sales representatives, and customer success managers. We developed a cloud-based version of our software that made implementation faster and more cost-effective for clients. Our monthly recurring revenue grew steadily as we transitioned from one-time sales to a subscription model. Throughout this period of growth, I occasionally checked Thomas's LinkedIn profile to see where his career had taken him. According to his updates, he had risen to Vice President of Operations at Apex Technologies, one of the largest technology corporations in the country. His profile picture showed him in an expensive suit with a confident smile, looking very much like our father. I never reached out, and neither did my family. Despite Logitech Solutions beginning to appear in industry publications and gaining recognition for innovation, I received no congratulatory messages or attempts at reconciliation. It was as if I had never existed to them, which, based on my father's words years ago, might have been their preference all along. This silence no longer bothered me. I had built something meaningful without their support or acknowledgement. The validation I once desperately sought from them had been replaced by the satisfaction of creating value for our clients and opportunities for our growing team. By our 4th year in business, Logitech Solutions had grown to 50 employees with offices in 3 cities. We were profitable, debt-free, and attracting attention from larger players in the industry. Several offered to acquire us, but Riley and I always declined. We were building something that was ours, on our terms, and we weren't finished yet. Little did I know that the next phase of our growth would bring an unexpected collision between my professional success and the family that had once discarded me. Our 5th year brought unprecedented growth. Logitech Solutions had expanded to over 200 employees across 5 offices nationwide. Our client list included respected regional businesses and a growing number of national corporations. Industry analysts were calling us the disruptive force in supply chain management, and venture capital firms were aggressively courting us for investment opportunities. Riley and I maintained majority ownership while accepting strategic investments that allowed us to scale more rapidly. We had just completed a successful Series A funding round when we received an interesting email from Apex Technologies, one of the giants in our industry. "They want to explore a potential partnership," Riley said, forwarding me the message from their corporate development team. "This could be huge for us. They have the enterprise clients we've been wanting to reach." I stared at the email, my stomach tightening. Apex Technologies, the company where Thomas had built his career. The connection couldn't be coincidental. "What's wrong?" Riley asked, noticing my expression. "This is exactly the kind of opportunity we've been working toward." I hadn't told Riley much about my family background, only that I was essentially on my own. Now, I briefly explained the situation, that my estranged brother worked as a VP at Apex. "We can decline if you're uncomfortable," Riley offered, after hearing the story. "There are other paths to growth." I considered it carefully. No, I finally decided. We shouldn't let personal history interfere with business decisions. If this partnership makes sense for Logitech, we should pursue it. I can remain professional. The initial discussions were handled by our business development team, with Riley leading the negotiations. I deliberately stayed in the background, reviewing proposals and offering input, but avoiding direct interaction with Apex representatives. As the partnership discussions progressed, however, it became clear that I would need to be involved in the high-level meetings. Apex wanted to integrate some of our proprietary algorithms into their enterprise platform, which required technical explanations that only I could provide. The day of our first executive meeting arrived. We gathered in Apex's gleaming headquarters in a downtown skyscraper, a stark contrast to our modest offices. I wore my best suit and prepared extensively for the technical presentation, trying to focus on the business at hand rather than the possibility of seeing Thomas. As the Apex executives filed into the conference room, I scanned their faces. Thomas wasn't among them. I felt a mixture of relief and disappointment as introductions began. Perhaps he worked in a different division or location. 20 minutes into the meeting, the door opened, and Thomas walked in. "Sorry I'm late," he announced, taking a seat at the far end of the table. Budget meetings ran over. He looked exactly as I remembered, just older and more polished. The same confident posture, the same way of commanding attention when he entered a room. He didn't look at me directly as he opened his laptop and asked the presenter to continue. The Apex CEO, Martin Reynolds, interrupted. "Before we continue, I should introduce everyone. Thomas, these are the founders of Logitech Solutions, Riley Sanchez and Clive Anderson." Thomas's head snapped up at my name. Our eyes met across the conference table, and I saw the moment of recognition, followed by visible discomfort. He recovered quickly, offering a professional nod. "Clive," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "What a surprise." "Thomas," I replied with equal composure. "It's been a while." The meeting proceeded with an undercurrent of tension that only Thomas and I could feel. I delivered my technical presentation flawlessly, answering complex questions and demonstrating the value our technology could bring to Apex's platform. Throughout, I maintained direct eye contact with everyone, except Thomas, whom I addressed only as part of the broader group. As the meeting concluded, Martin Reynolds expressed enthusiasm about the potential partnership. "We should have our teams draft the initial agreement. This looks promising for both companies." In the hallway afterward, Thomas approached me while Riley was engaged in conversation with other Apex executives. "I didn't know you were behind Logitech," he said quietly. "When did you start a company?" "About 7 years ago," I replied. "Right after college." "College. So you found a way to go after all." "I did." An awkward silence stretched between us. 20 years of family history compressed into a corporate hallway exchange. "Look," Thomas finally said, lowering his voice further, "we should talk privately. This partnership, maybe I could help ensure favorable terms, given our connection." I studied my brother's face, searching for any genuine emotion, remorse, pride, even curiosity about my life. I saw only calculation and self-interest. "I prefer to keep personal and professional matters separate," I responded coolly. "The partnership should succeed or fail on its own merits." Thomas frowned slightly. "Don't be naive, Clive. Business is about relationships. We could help each other here." "I've done fine without your help so far," I said, then added more gently, "How are Mom and Dad?" Thomas's expression flickered with surprise at the question. "They're fine. Dad retired last year. Mom still volunteers at the library. They moved to a smaller place in the suburbs." He hesitated. "They don't talk about you much." "I wouldn't expect them to," I replied, unsurprised. "Please don't mention this encounter to them. I'd prefer to keep my professional success separate from family matters." Before Thomas could respond, Riley joined us. "Everything okay here?" "Just catching up," I said smoothly. Thomas and I knew each other a long time ago. The due diligence process for the partnership accelerated over the next few weeks. Our technical teams collaborated well, but I noticed increasing pressure from Thomas to modify certain terms of the agreement in ways that disproportionately benefited Apex. "Your brother is pushing hard on the revenue split," Riley noted after one particularly tense negotiation session. almost like he has a personal stake in maximizing Apex's position. I had been transparent with Riley about Thomas's attempt to leverage our connection. He's always been competitive, I said, and he probably feels threatened that his little brother's company is being treated as an equal partner with his corporate employer. What neither of us anticipated was what our financial team would discover during the deeper phases of partnership review. As part of standard procedure, we examined Apex's financial reports related to the business units our software would integrate with. One of our financial analysts flagged some inconsistencies in the operations division Thomas oversaw. "The numbers don't add up," she explained, showing me spreadsheets highlighting discrepancies. "There are budget allocations that disappear into vendor accounts we can't verify." It could be nothing, but further investigation revealed a sophisticated scheme. Thomas had apparently been creating phantom vendor accounts and diverting corporate funds, the small amounts from numerous projects that added up to millions over several years. The money ultimately flowed through shell companies back to his personal accounts. I sat in my office late one night, staring at the evidence compiled by our team. The brother my parents had favored, invested in, and believed in was a fraud. The perfect son was a criminal. My finger hovered over Martin Reynolds's contact information in my phone. One call could end Thomas's career and possibly result in criminal charges. It would be the perfect revenge for a lifetime of being the less favored son, for being called a mistake. But was revenge what I really wanted? I thought about Grandma Eleanor and what she might advise. This wasn't about settling family scores. It was about business ethics and professional integrity. In the end, I made the call not as a vengeful brother, but as a business leader with an ethical obligation. "Martin, it's Clive Anderson. I need to meet with you privately tomorrow. It's urgent and confidential." The next morning, I presented the evidence to Martin without editorial comment. We discovered these discrepancies during our review. Given their serious nature, I felt obligated to bring them directly to your attention. Martin's face grew increasingly grim as he reviewed the documents. "How long have you known about this?" "We just confirmed it yesterday. That's why I called immediately." "And you're aware this implicates your brother?" I met his gaze steadily. "Yes, Thomas is my brother, but Logitech operates with absolute integrity. We couldn't proceed with a partnership while withholding this information." Martin studied me carefully. "Many people would have buried this or used it as leverage. Why didn't you?" "Because my company reflects my values, not my family history," I replied simply. 3 days later, Thomas was escorted from Apex headquarters by security. The partnership discussions were temporarily paused, but resumed a month later with different executives leading the Apex team. Martin Reynolds personally called to inform me that their internal investigation had confirmed our findings, and Thomas was facing both termination and potential criminal charges. "Your integrity impressed our board," Martin said. "It can't have been easy to come forward given your personal connection." The partnership eventually proceeded, launching Logitech to a new level of industry recognition. The irony wasn't lost on me. The family that had once rejected me had inadvertently played a role in my company's biggest breakthrough, not through their support, but through their absence, which had forced me to build everything on my own terms. The partnership with Apex Technologies transformed Logitech Solutions. Within 18 months, our client base tripled, and our revenue grew by 500%. We expanded internationally, opening offices in London, Singapore, and Toronto. Our workforce grew to over 800 employees worldwide. Riley and I navigated this explosive growth by focusing relentlessly on our core values: innovation, integrity, and customer success. We turned down acquisition offers from several technology giants, preferring to maintain our independence and culture. "They're offering $3 billion, Riley said, after one particularly aggressive pitch from a Silicon Valley behemoth. "That's life-changing money for everyone involved." "We're just getting started," I replied. "And I didn't build this company to sell it to someone else's vision. Instead, We prepared for an initial public offering. The process was exhausting. Endless meetings with investment bankers, regulatory filings, roadshow presentations to potential investors. Throughout it all, I maintained a low personal profile, letting our company's performance and technology speak for itself. The IPO exceeded all expectations. Logitech's stock price jumped 60% on the first day of trading, valuing the company at over $4 billion. Business publications scrambled for interviews with the supply chain wunderkind, who had disrupted an established industry. Forbes featured me in their 30 Under 30 list, with a profile that focused on the company's meteoric rise, but contained little personal information, exactly as I preferred it. The Wall Street Journal ran a feature on our innovative approach to complex logistics problems. Even mainstream news outlets picked up the story of the college graduate who had built a multi-billion-dollar enterprise in less than a decade. When Riley decided to step back from day-to-day operations to focus on strategic initiatives and venture investments, the board unanimously appointed me as CEO. At 31, I became one of the youngest CEOs of a publicly traded technology company. My first initiative as CEO was establishing the Logitech Foundation, focused on providing educational opportunities for first-generation college students from disadvantaged backgrounds. I personally endowed the foundation with $20 million in Logitech stock, ensuring it would grow alongside the company. This foundation will provide full scholarships to students who demonstrate extraordinary potential but lack financial resources, I announced at the launch event. Every student deserves the chance to pursue their dreams without being limited by circumstances beyond their control. I didn't mention that the foundation was inspired by my own experience. I didn't need to. The purpose was clear to anyone who knew my story. Life settled into a demanding but fulfilling rhythm. Days filled with strategic decisions, product reviews, and leadership responsibilities. Evenings often spent alone in my downtown penthouse, enjoying the solitude I had come to appreciate after years of shared living spaces. Weekends occasionally spent with a small circle of close friends, who knew me as Clive the person, not Clive the CEO. It was during this period of personal and professional equilibrium that the past came knocking, literally. The first contact was an email that slipped through my executive assistant's filters because it came from my mother's personal account. The subject line read simply, "Your family." I stared at it for several minutes before opening it. "Dear Clive, we recently saw an article about your company's success. We are so proud of what you've accomplished and would love to reconnect. We've missed you. Love, Mom." No mention of the years of silence. No acknowledgement of my father's devastating words or their complete absence during my struggle. Just pride in my public success and a desire to reconnect. I deleted the email without responding. More messages followed. Birthday wishes, sent 3 days after my actual birthday. Christmas greetings. Casual inquiries about my health and happiness. I deleted them all. Then came attempts through other channels. Messages on LinkedIn from my father's newly created account. A letter to Logitech's corporate headquarters. Even a call to my assistant claiming a family emergency that turned out to be entirely fabricated when my assistant pressed for details. The persistence was both surprising and suspicious. After years of complete silence, why this sudden determination to re-establish contact? Curious about the timing, I hired a discreet private investigator to look into my parents' current situation. The report revealed troubling details. Following Thomas's dismissal from Apex Technologies, he had faced criminal charges resulting in significant legal fees. He had ultimately accepted a plea deal to avoid prison time, but was essentially unemployable in his former industry. My parents, who had downsized after my father's retirement, had apparently been supporting Thomas financially. Medical records indicated my father had recently been diagnosed with a serious heart condition requiring expensive treatment not fully covered by his insurance. Their modest retirement savings were dwindling rapidly. The timing of their renewed interest in my life suddenly made perfect sense. Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet them for coffee at a neutral location, a cafe in their new neighborhood. I arrived early, choosing a corner table that offered some privacy. They entered together, looking older and smaller than I remembered. My father's confident stride had been replaced by a cautious shuffle. My mother's hair had gone completely gray. They scanned the room anxiously until spotting me, then approached with uncertain smiles. "Clive," my mother said, her voice wavering slightly, "you look wonderful." "Very professional," my father added, eyeing my tailored suit. "Very successful." I stood to greet them, but didn't offer a hug. "Thank you for coming," I said formally. "Please sit down." The conversation that followed was an exercise in careful avoidance. They asked surface questions about my company without showing any real understanding of what we did. They mentioned mutual acquaintances from our old neighborhood. My mother described her volunteer work in excessive detail. Neither mentioned Thomas or the reason for their decade of silence. Neither acknowledged the words that had driven me from their home, or the complete absence of support during my most difficult years. Finally, as our coffee cups emptied, my father cleared his throat. "Clive, we want you to know how sorry we are for losing touch," he said, carefully selecting his words. "Life gets busy, and before you know it, years have passed." "Losing touch," I repeated. "Is that how you characterize telling your son he was a mistake and refusing to help with his education?" My mother flinched. My father's jaw tightened. "That was a difficult time for us financially," he said defensively. Perhaps I spoke harshly. "Perhaps," I echoed, keeping my voice level. An uncomfortable silence settled over the table. My mother broke it with forced cheerfulness. "We've been having some challenges lately. Your father's health hasn't been the best, and our insurance doesn't cover all the specialists he needs to see. And Thomas has had some career difficulties," my father added. "A misunderstanding with his former employer." "Fraud isn't generally considered a misunderstanding," I replied quietly. Their surprised expressions confirmed they hadn't realized I knew about Thomas's situation. "He made mistakes," my mother admitted. "But he's family. We support each other through difficult times." The irony of her statement hung in the air between us. "We thought," my father said carefully, "now that you're in such a fortunate position, you might want to help your family. That's what successful people do, isn't it? Take care of their own?" There it was, the real purpose behind their sudden desire to reconnect. I studied them across the table. These people who had raised me but never really seen me, who had nurtured one son and neglected another, who had gone 10 years without attempting contact until they needed financial assistance. "I need to think about this," I said finally, rising from my chair. "It's been a lot to process seeing you again." My mother reached for my hand. "We're so proud of you, Clive. We always knew you would do well." The blatant revision of history almost made me laugh. Instead, I simply nodded and left the cafe, their expectant gazes following me out the door. That night, I couldn't sleep. I paced my penthouse, replaying the conversation and the years of rejection that preceded it. Part of me wanted to ignore their transparent attempt to access my wealth. Another part recognized that despite everything, these were the people who had given me life, however unwillingly. The question wasn't whether I could help them financially. I could do so without noticing the expense. The question was whether I should, and what it would mean for my own healing if I did. The question of how to respond to my parents' sudden reappearance consumed my thoughts for days. I canceled meetings, something I rarely did, and scheduled an emergency session with Dr. Elizabeth Winters, the therapist I had been seeing occasionally since Logitech's IPO. "They want money," I told her bluntly after explaining the situation. "Not a relationship, not reconciliation, just financial support." "And how do you feel about that?" she asked. "Angry, vindicated, sad, confused." I paced her office. Part of me wants to tell them exactly what they told me, that I don't have room in my life for them. Another part wonders if helping them financially is the right thing to do, regardless of their motives. Dr. Winters listened patiently. The question isn't what you owe them, Clive. It's what response will allow you to continue your own healing journey. After much reflection, I decided to meet my parents once more, this time at their home. I wanted to see the environment they had created without me, to confront the physical space of my rejection before making a final decision. Their new house was modest, a single-story ranch-style home in a quiet suburb. Nothing like the colonial where I had grown up. My father answered the door, surprise evident on his face. "Clive, we weren't expecting you. I should have called first," I acknowledged. "Is this a bad time?" No, come in." The interior was cluttered but clean. Family photos adorned the walls and shelves, many featuring Thomas at various life stages, a few showing my parents in their younger days. I noticed one small graduation photo of me, apparently added recently since the frame still had the store sticker on the back. My mother emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "Clive, what a wonderful surprise." We sat in their living room, the conversation initially as stilted as our cafe meeting. Gradually, I steered it toward the past, asking direct questions about their decisions and perspective. "Did you ever think about me after I left?" I asked. "Did you ever try to find out if I was okay?" My mother looked down at her hands. "We assumed you were fine. You were always so self-sufficient. We knew you'd land on your feet," my father added. "You were always resourceful." Their answers revealed more than they intended. They had rewritten my independence as a choice, rather than a necessity. My self-sufficiency as innate, rather than forced upon me. "I wasn't fine," I said quietly. "I worked 3 jobs while attending community college. I slept 4 hours a night for years. I lived in apartments with questionable safety because they were all I could afford. Not because I was resourceful, but because I had no other options." My mother's eyes filled with tears. My father looked uncomfortable but remained silent. "I didn't come here to make you feel guilty," I continued. "I came to understand where we stand now. You've made it clear you need financial help with Dad's medical bills and perhaps with supporting Thomas. We wouldn't ask if it wasn't important," my father said quickly. "Heart specialists are expensive, and our insurance—" I held up a hand to stop him. "I understand the situation, and I've made my decision." I explained that I would arrange for my father's medical bills to be paid through the Logitech Foundation's healthcare initiative. The foundation would cover his treatments anonymously. He would never receive bills, but neither would he receive checks from me personally. I would not be providing direct financial support to them or to Thomas. "But we're family," my mother protested. "Doesn't that mean anything to you?" "Family," I replied carefully, "is about more than biological connection. It's about consistent support, unconditional acceptance, and being there during difficult times. We made mistakes," my father admitted reluctantly. "All parents do." "Yes, they do," I agreed. "And adult children have to decide what kind of relationship they want with their parents, based on the foundation that was built." I stood to leave, having said what I came to say. At the door, I turned back to them. "I don't hate you," I said, realizing as I spoke that it was true. "I don't wish you ill. That's why I'm arranging for Dad's medical care. But I don't trust you, and I don't need you in my life. The time for being my parents has passed." My mother began to protest, but my father placed a restraining hand on her arm. For the first time, I saw something like understanding in his eyes. "The foundation will contact your doctors directly," I added. "Please don't try to contact me again. I wish you well, but our paths diverged long ago." As I drove away from their house for the final time, I felt a weight lifting, not because I had rejected them as they once rejected me, but because I had finally spoken my truth while still acting with compassion. I had broken the cycle of conditional love they had established. The following week, I announced a new initiative through the Logitech Foundation, the Eleanor Scholarship Program, named after my grandmother. It would provide comprehensive support to students who demonstrated exceptional potential despite challenging family circumstances. The most important lesson I've learned in building Logitech, I told the audience at the launch event, is that success isn't determined by where you start, but by the people who believe in you along the way. Sometimes, a single person seeing your potential can change everything. The first cohort of Eleanor Scholars included 12 students from diverse backgrounds. At the welcome reception, I spoke with each of them individually, hearing stories that echoed aspects of my own journey. A young woman named Jasmine had been raised by a single mother who worked 3 jobs but still couldn't afford college tuition. A young man named Marcus had excelled academically, despite being homeless his senior year of high school. Another student, Alicia, had been told repeatedly by her stepfather that education was wasted on her. The people who say you can't succeed don't determine your future, I told them. Their limitations aren't yours. In these students, I saw reflections of my younger self, determined, resilient, and deserving of support. The foundation couldn't give them what my parents had denied me, unconditional love and emotional support, but it could remove the practical barriers to their success. Over time, I built a life rich in chosen connections. Professor Jenkins remained a trusted mentor and eventually joined Logitech's board of directors. Riley and I maintained our friendship and business partnership through various transitions. I developed close relationships with colleagues who became friends, and friends who felt more like family than my biological relations ever had. I never heard directly from my parents again, though the Foundation's healthcare program reported that my father completed his treatment successfully. Thomas apparently moved to another state to restart his career away from the shadow of his legal troubles. Sometimes I wondered if he ever reflected on the stark reversal of our fortunes, the golden child who fell from grace, and the mistake who built an empire. The company continued to thrive under my leadership, but I found greater satisfaction in the Foundation's work than in corporate milestones. Each new cohort of scholars represented possibilities realized, potential unlocked. In their success, I found healing for old wounds. Looking back now at 32, I understand that being labeled a mistake ultimately set me free. It forced me to define my own worth, rather than seeking external validation. It taught me that family can be chosen, that support comes in unexpected forms, and that rejection can sometimes be the beginning of a better path. The words that were meant to diminish me became the catalyst for building something meaningful, not just a successful company, but a life of purpose and impact, not despite being unwanted, but because that early rejection forced me to discover my own strength and define success on my own terms. If you've ever been made to feel unwanted or insufficient by those who should have valued you most, remember that their limitations don't define your potential. True family consists of those who see your worth and support your growth, whether they share your DNA or not. Have you ever had to rebuild your life after being rejected by someone important to you? How did that experience shape who you've become? Share your story in the comments below. And if this journey resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share this video with someone who might need to hear that their worth isn't determined by others' perception. Thank you for listening to my story. And remember, sometimes the greatest success stories begin with someone else's mistake.